It gives me great pleasure to introduce this fascinating film about the cultural and economic history of the parish of Norton Keynes. It concentrates on the religious aspects of local life, education, transport, the war years, and of course coal mining. The latter dominated the area for so many years, and along with the strategic nature of the transport system, put Norton Keynes firmly at the centre of the Industrial Revolution. I hope that everybody enjoys and learns from this remarkable film. It should help all who have a local connection to further understand and respect their rich heritage.
Coal mining in Norton began in a very small way over 350 years ago, when surface outcrops of coal in the Long Lane and Washbrook Lane area were worked. It is said that during the English Civil War, miners from Norton were used at the siege of Lichfield Cathedral Close to tunnel under the walls so that barrels of gunpowder could be exploded and the walls of the garrison breached. But it was not until some 200 years later, in the 1840s and 50s, that our village, which for centuries had been a tiny agricultural-based community, entered the industrial age. The building of canals and railways had opened up communications. The South Staffordshire coalfield was almost exhausted. Technology had advanced. Now was the time for the development of the Cannock Chase coalfield by deep mining. However, the coal seams, varying from a few inches to a few feet, lay under several hundred feet of sand and gravel beds, and the sinking of shafts was difficult due to flooding and areas of running sand. Deep mining began in the village in 1858 when Pastor Jerome C. Jerome from Walsall took a lease of mineral rights from William Hanbury, a joint lord of the manor of Norton. His attempts failed, and in 1860 the lease was taken up by the Holcroft family. The mine, which became Conduit Colliery No. 3 Pit, has always been affectionately known as Jerome's. It was situated in Walsall Road with its main shafts under what is now Durapipe's warehouse. The colliery was adjacent to the Birmingham Extension Canal and had a mineral line connecting it to the main railway system near Brown Hills. During its heyday, the Conduit Colliery Company employed over 2,000 men and boys. Other mines were developed soon afterwards. Norton Green Colliery, its site now occupied by Norton Aluminium Factory, the mineral line from which went under the Walsall Road to the canal and railway. The old colliery chimney stack is the last to survive on Cannock Chase. Coppice Colliery, always known as the Fair Lady, after Lady Hanbury, was situated at 5 Ways. Its spoil heap is now a nature reserve. A mineral line connected to the canal near Stokes's Lane and another to the railway at Jerome's. This last was called Norton Springs Tramway and gave its name to the bridge in the centre of the village where the line passed underneath the Brown Hills Road. Other mines existed on the south side of the Watling Street, notably Worley Grove Colliery in Lime Lane, whose office buildings still survive. Deep mining lasted just 100 years, from its beginnings in 1858 to the nationalisation of the coal mines in 1947, when those remaining in production were finally closed. Mining was always a dirty and dangerous occupation, particularly in those early days, and all had their share of accidents and fatalities. On Thursday, October the 14th, 1926, at Jerome's, an alarming accident took place when the cage carrying 10 men crashed to the pit bottom due to overwinding. 8 of the men were seriously injured, suffering injuries to ankles, legs or back. The man responsible for the winding engine was accused by the village as being at fault, and it is still a subject talked about amongst the old mining families. The most awful accident occurred at Worley Grove Colliery when an underground explosion on the 2nd of October 1930 killed 14 men, all but one being married with children. The explosion occurred under the Fleur-de-Lis Inn on Watling Street. King George V sent a message of sympathy to the families of those involved. 10 of the bodies were buried in a mass grave at Brown Hills Church on the following Tuesday. Crowds lined the streets. The blinds of shops and houses were drawn, and all shops closed. The silence was broken only by the sobs of the womenfolk and the sympathetic murmurs of the men. The cortege was headed by a firing party and buglers of the 2nd North Midland Field Company Royal Engineers Territorial Army, who were based at Norton Hall. The other 4 men were buried at Pelsall, Hammerwich, Walsall Wood and Norton. But mining brings with it devastation. In the late 1940s, Norton was known as the most badly damaged village in England from mining subsidence. Between 1940 and 45, the land in the area of Church Road and Washbrook Lane dropped 20 feet. Villagers in Hensford Road said that at one time they could see only the pinnacles on the church tower, and afterwards they could see people walking in the churchyard. Due to its effects, the village lost Norton Hall, national schools, village institute, Methodist chapel, Fleur-de-Lis Inn, farm buildings, shops and homes. Additionally, it caused the loss of the canal, streams and pools as the ground was broken open. Even the church was damaged. The old family said they could always tell when to put the kettle on the hob, as the last shot firing of the day underground made the cups and saucers rattle on the tables. It is all a fading memory now, kept alive by the stories being passed down from generation to generation by those whose fathers, grandfathers and great-grandfathers mined the black diamonds beneath our feet.
I left school in 1923 from a school over the road here, and I got a job all in the rollers on haulage, rope haulage, and I did that for 5 or 6 months, and then there come a vacancy in the blacksmith shop, and the engineer asked me if I wanted a job in the blacksmith shop. I said I should like that. So it's just over 14, coming 15, I went into the blacksmith shop, and I carried on there till I was 16 and a half. October the 14th, 1926 was the cage accident, overworn. So I worked on the cage with this foreman blacksmith. Attached to the cage was what we call a detaching hook, which went through a bell, and that had struck the bottom of the detaching hook. It opened out and should have held the cage there, but it didn't. There was a big ring that held 6 chains together, 1 at each corner and 1 in the middle, and 2 in the middle. It came down from the bell down onto what we call the keps. As when the cage come up, it was caught as the tubes was pushed off. Fortunately, the banksman had got the caps in, so it landed on the caps. We always kept 2 girders to go under the cage. If we changed the detaching hook or chains or anything like that. So we had to hurry up and slip a plank over the shaft under the cage and thread these girders underneath to stop it going all the way. Then we had to get 4 props because the girders was 6 foot away, so we had to get 4 props from these girders under the cage, keep it there. All my mates worked in the pit, so they were getting more money than me. I was on the surface. I think I'll go down the pit. So this fella, this nephew, said, what about coming with me? He worked on the face. Anyway, I worked around the bottom for about 6 months, and then this fella asked me to go on the face, and that's what I did. And after I'd been in the pit 18 months, I thought, this ain't for me. So I came up one day and I run into the engineer at Conduit and asked him if there was a vacancy on the surface. And he said, there's a job in the blacksmith shop. He said, oh, the fitting shop, you'll go in the fitting shop. After I'd been in the fitting shop for 3 or 4 years, there come a job vacant as a welder. So I took that job on, and that's where I finished up at Conduit, as a welder.
I go into lamp house, pick my electric light off and my self-rescue off the rack, and also my checks. And then I go to the opening where they got the flame safety lamps. They know you automatically by your number. So he passes it through. The first thing you do to see if there's no movement in the flame. If there is, you hand it back to him and he has to tighten it up again because it's all automatically locked. So and then I just hang it on my belt. So you see I've got the electric light and the battery and the self-rescue and this all hanging around me like a Christmas tree, right? So then I go into the office and I start to book the menu. I'm not in a very good temper then. When I'm going down the pit, I throw the one check in the box, the other one I've usually got tied and a bit of string, around there, because that has to be given when I come up. So they know I'm either down the pit or up, so they got sort of a double tag on me sort of thing, They got one on the bank which goes back to the lamp house, as they can come round and take the time and one rest another. And also they put a red check on for day shift, if you're on day shift, a yellow check on for afternoon, and a blue check on when night, so they know what shift you're on, and they know whether you're down the pit or up the pit, and that's how it goes.
Routes of communication have always played a decisive role in the history of our village. Even before the community was settled here over 1,000 years ago, the Watling Street, the A5, was one of the most important roads in Britain. Far from being a Roman road, as it is often stated, it was a major prehistoric highway. Our section of the Watling Street was for many centuries used by the Welsh and the Irish drovers, bringing cattle and sheep to Coventry and London. Even today, despite the new M6 toll road running just feet away, it daily carries road traffic from all over Europe. During its construction, the new toll road brought a period of prosperity to the local labourers, and nearby toll plaza and service area continues to provide employment for many local people today. Blake, or Black Street, running locally from the Rising Sun public house, was another prehistoric route. From the Rising Sun it ran across Norton Bog, now Chasewater Country Park, along the front of Stag Farm, probably their oldest house in Norton Keynes, over wasteland to near Five Ways Island and on to the Cross Keys coaching in Hensford. Salt was carried along this link with Coventry, Stafford and Chester. The road was so bad that coaches created a road 1/4 mile wide, and John Wesley, the founder of Methodism, recorded that he was trapped locally for 5 days due to snow. South of Watling Street lies another ancient route, Lime Lane, joining Walsall and Rushall lime pits through Norton Keynes to the smelting works at Rising Brook, Slitting Mill and Redmore on Cannock Chase, where oak trees were provided the charcoal used in the smelting process. Canals provided a means of sending coal from Norton's mines all over the country. In 1840, the Worley and Essington Canal Company merged with the Birmingham Canals Navigation Company and began construction of the Cannock Chase Reservoir, now Chasewater, from which water levels in the canals could be maintained. The 1850s saw the construction of Cannock Extension canals from the Worley and Essington canals at Fishley Common past the Grove Colliery, where a double basin provided access to the mines on Brownhills Common. It passed under the Watling Street and to Jerome's Colliery. The canal continued under the Walsall Road and Chapel Street into a basin near Badger's Bridge in Stokes' Lane, which served the Coppice Colliery at 5 ways, joining the Staffordshire and Worcester Canal at Bridgetown. A spur of the canal reached the Globe Inn at Hensford, but geological conditions and investors transferring allegiance to the railways, preventing the completion to join the Trent and Mersey Canal at Milford. The canal, however, looks forward to a brighter future, as the Lichfield and Hatherton Canal Restoration Trust are working to re-establish the link between the Staffordshire and Shropshire canals and the Birmingham Canal navigation by constructing a new route that will pass from Bridgetown to the Grove Colliery at Little Worley, where a leisure boat marina is planned. In 1853 saw the beginning of railway construction to pits at Brownhills, but soon a mineral line opened from the Coffees or Fair Lady to the canal basin near Badger's Bridge. Norton Springs Tramway ran from the Coppy's pit along the back of Hensford Road and under the bridge to Brownhills Road to Jerome's Colliery in Walsall Road. Over the centuries, new inventions led to many changes of locomotives pulling the coal trucks. Men were transported from mine to mine, but the coaches were very primitive. The Grove Colliery Basin was connected to Harrison's No. 3 at Great Worley by a further mineral line. A short mineral line ran from Norton Green Colliery under Walsall Road across Betty's Lane to the marshalling yard and canals at Jerome. This was abandoned in favour of connection across Norton Green Lane running to the junction of Butts Lane and Church Road. In April 1879, the London and Western Railways opened its Norton branch, which ran across the Chase from Norton Colliery Junction over Walsall Road and underneath Chapel Street to the East Cannock Junction on the Cannock Mineral Line. This gave the link to national networks. Thus the many local quarries were linked to the outside world. Over the century, the whole country saw many changes of gauges or widths of rail, and the engines that pulled the frequently updated carriages, yet sadly Norton Keynes never had a passenger rail service, the nearest passenger station being at Cannock. Nationalisation in 1947 was the beginning of the end of the coal mining in Norton Keynes, where there had been very busy canals full of barges carrying coal, the mineral lines taking the full tubs to feed the national appetite for more power, more coal, more energy. The canals became clogged with unwanted boats, the rail rusted and the tubs rotted. Mining subsidence had severely damaged property and the canals, and those north of the Watling Street were filled in, burying dozens of old barges. Only the section of the canal south of the Watling Street survived, and here boats buildings which started over 100 years ago with the construction of oak-bottomed coal barges had been replaced by luxury steel-bodied boats which are custom built for the burgeoning leisure industry. A small cottage industry in painted canal utensils such as kettles, pots and stools also continued to thrive. Bridges and rail tracks were dismantled and land sold off for industrial and residential building. Today, all that remains are the roads, busier than ever, and transport undreamt of at the height of the era of canals and railways.
The settlers of the 10th century probably constructed a simple chapel of wooden planks. This was probably replaced with a stone building in the 12th century. The first written record of the church is in 1548, when a John Trafford is listed as curate. The good parish registers date back to 1566, and together with the parish officer's account books are held at Staffordshire County Record Office. Sometime in 1719 or 20, a major fire damaged the church, and a church brief was issued to enable collections to be made in churches around the country to defray the cost of rebuilding and repair. This original drawing from about 1831 shows the new tower built on the old foundations in the 1820s, despite a low income from the church rate. Some of the gravestones visible in the drawing are still in place today, including the skull and crossbones stone just by the main door, which continues to intrigue visitors. Around the same date, David Cox, the famous watercolour artist, painted a view of the interior of the church, showing it to be very small. The body of the church was again rebuilt in 1832, funded by public subscription, and further alterations took place in 1885. In January 1888, a disastrous fire occurred, and despite the efforts of school children who helped to form a bucket chain from the nearby brook, the body of the church was destroyed. It was closed and rebuilt once again, this time adding a north aisle and vestry. It was finally reopened in October 1888. The new church was graced with the most modern gas lighting. The east window of the church forms the first World War memorial of the village. The design of the window was put out to a public competition, which was won by Arthur Clarke, whose great niece, Beryl Parsonage, still lives in Norton Keynes. The stained glass window, created by the Bromsgrove Guild, depicts miners climbing a pit head and descending as soldiers. The names of village men who died in the conflict can be read on the pages of the open book at the base of the window. The window was dedicated with great celebrations in the village. Soldiers were on parade and bands played as people lined the streets. Within the church are several memorial plaques to the members of the Hussey Fawkes Wallace family of Little Worley Hall, lords of the manor, and benefactors to the church and parish down the generations to the present day. There is also a memorial to members of the Harrison family of Norton Hall, joint lords of the manor with the Wallace family until sometime in the 20th century. Unusually, there is a plaque dedicated to a local midwife, Dora Yates, Norton Keynes midwife for 25 years, covering the period before and after the introduction of the National Health Service. She was called the Florence Nightingale of Norton Keynes, and the plaque was paid for by public subscription. Today, the church continues to serve the local community of Norton Keynes.
When the miners came seeking work, they brought Methodism into the village. The Wesleyan chapel started in 1853 possibly in a house in Norton East Road. The Bethel Methodist Chapel was built in Chapel Street. This imposing building had attached to it the Craddock Memorial Sunday School. A large Sunday school meant many happy Sunday school anniversaries with the girls dressed in white, harvest festivals and other social occasions. Mining subsidence rendered the building unsafe and it was demolished in 1944. A chapel was built in Norton East Road, which was known as Braidley's Chapel. Mr. Braidley was known as a fine preacher and singer. A village saying was that when we get to heaven, the Methodists will be on the back row, for they love to sing, and Mr. Braidley will be behind them. The primitive Methodist movement registered a corrugated metal church known as the Tin Tabernacle in Brownhills Road in 1882. Jerome C. Jerome, father of Warsaw author Jerome K. Jerome and proprietor of the conduit Jerome Mine, attended here, and it was said that any man seen in the chapel on Sunday night was guaranteed a job in the pit on Monday morning. Subsidence here caused the floor to become tilted, and further damage meant that it was eventually also demolished. The new modern building for Trinity Methodist Church in Poplar Street was opened in the latter part of 1968. Elias Reid was a prime mover in the scheme, but sadly died days after the foundation stone was laid. The whole church worked hard to raise funds, with the ladies of the village knitting squares to create blankets, and the sale of land and the Roundtree Trust. All the funds were provided. In 1982, a new school and function room was dedicated amid great celebrations. Baptismal records are now in the keeping of Warsaw Borough Archives, but the pulpit, altar rails and font from the Bethel Chapel have found a new home at Poplar Street, as the church continues to serve the community in a variety of ways.
The first village school was a charity school founded by the Lords of the Manor in 1737. This was situated at the junction of School Lane, Little Whaley and Watling Street. Pupils wrote with chalk and slates. The school was sold to the trustees in 1862 but continued as a private dame school until the turn of the century. It was demolished around 1950. Bethel Methodist Chapel was a fine schoolroom named the Craddock Memorial School and held both day and Sunday school for the pupils. This building was also used for education of adults and for training of miners. Donation of land at the junction of Norton Green Lane and Church Road by the Lord of the Manor, plus other monies, enabled the Church of England Elementary School to be erected in 1864. By 1876 there were 262 pupils and an extension was completed in 1884. These church schools were greatly damaged by the mining subsidence and were closed in the 1934s and demolished some years later. St James's Church held a Sunday school for young people. The population growth due to the opening of Jerome Colliery meant a larger and more central school was needed. Further population increases necessitated the building of separate infant schools on the site now occupied by the library in Burntwood Road. It was opened in 1881 under the auspices of the National Society. It remained until 1927 when the new Norton Keynes Senior Council School was built in Workhouse Road, which it was renamed School Road. Infant and junior school pupils from Church of England schools, the Bethel Chapel and the National Schools transferred to the brand new building in School Road in 1927. In 1934, this was greatly enlarged to accommodate the ever-growing population. Mr. Underwood was headmaster and always referred to his pupil as his boys. In 1915, a plaque was erected in the school containing the names of all ex-pupils of the school who were soldiers in the First World War. These wooden buildings still thrive at Norton Keynes Primary School. Some school logbooks from the 19th century survived and are now kept at present in the high school and the junior primary schools in School Road. In the early 1960s, a secondary school opened in Burnford Road. This has been renamed as Norton Keynes Comprehensive School and now Norton Keynes High School. Today pupils use state-of-the-art interactive whiteboards with computers and projectors. The sports hall has been refurbished and provides most up-to-date equipment. In 1980, an additional school, the Jerome Primary School, opened in Chapel Street. The school celebrated their 25th anniversary by creating a Jubilee Garden and continues a tradition of rounded education for the children of Norton Keynes.
Before industrialisation, social life centred on traditional rural celebrations such as the Harvest Festival and Supper, bringing farmers, labourers and villagers together. May Day revels and the crowning of the May Queen are still remembered by older residents. These pictures were taken during the 1930s at the wooden schools. Coal mining and industrialisation led to the formation of societies that provided financial help in times of need, the most important being the ancient order of the Foresters, whose court Pride of Norton had its own Foresters' Hall in the village and provided a service to the members, the current secretary being Mrs. Chris Cartledge. The Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes, the Manchester Unity of Oddfellows, the Ancient Order of Shepherds and the Free Gardeners were other helpful societies, although little is known of their activities. Villagers still remember the dinner dances and coach outings that were organised. Football, cricket and later tennis and bowling, together with the pub games of darts and cribbage, provided team games and competition with other local villagers. Who can forget the Sunday morning spectacle of Clue's cloggers from the railway tavern cavorting on the summer football pitch? The game's baroque players provided comedy and drama at the church hall, and a wide variety of shows have been staged in the high school theatre. The Scout Troop was founded by Mr. Macpherson from Little Worley Hall almost 100 years ago and continues today. The Girls' Brigade, founded at the Methodist Church some 23 years ago, also continues to provide girls with a wide variety of activities. Local history studies continue under the Heritage Group within the Norton Keynes Partnership, which continues to foster communal village activities. The Dandies, a marching band for boys and girls, was founded in the 1930s. These splendidly attired musicians entertained the villagers for many years.
My dad was very musical. He was very clever where music was concerned, but football spoiled that. He started that up, and we started wearing black outfits and orange half moons on, and we called ourselves the Half Moons, but it didn't take very well, so they changed it to white trousers and red satin swallowtail coats, and so that's how it started up. There was a man in Railway Street, and he'd got a big foul pen. It was really big, so he wasn't using it anymore.
So we bought it between us, all the lot of us, and the men put a stove in there. We had a little fire in there, and I don't know where the seats came from, but there was seats in there, and curtains up at the windows, and people used to look forward, the members used to look forward to go there. We paid a membership. I just forget now how much we paid a week. It wasn't much, only coppers really. And I remember when I went to work, I was in the jazz band then, of course, and there was a newspaper cutting put on the board where I stood, and it was a photograph in the Walsall Observer of the band marching, and they'd written on Colonel Jones. That was me. Because I was... Oh dear. We had some good times, but of course the war finished all that, broke that up, and quite a few of them. Well, there's a photograph there, and we went to 14 competitions, and we had 13 firsts out of the 14. We went to a lot of competitions, and they told us at one place not to go again, because when we went the other bands wouldn't come because we kept winning prizes.
In 1966, the Militaires Jazz Band was founded by neighbours in Elm Road and Cherry Tree Road. Charles Scott was the first trainer, and the band performed and competed at many carnivals and fetes. With a maximum of 100 members, they were able to purchase their own purple and gold coach. In 1979, they were invited to perform at the Millennium celebrations of the Isle of Man, a signal reward for the hard work of all concerned. The early 70s saw Claire Forrester and Hazel Hawkins starting up a new group. Children were invited to suggest names for the band, and the one picked out of the hat was the Gay Tones Jazz Band. This group also had their own coach and played in many locations in their smart orange and white uniforms, cared for by Dolly Griffiths. An all-age Indian club swinging group, the Action Girls, was formed by Nanette Jackson and Debbie Roberts in the 1970s. In their pleated white skirts over blue leotards and red headband, the 40 members travelled all over the country. Sadly, all these bands disappeared during the 1980s. Finally, we must not forget the Pig Club, organised by Mr. Waite. In the early 1940s, members contributed food for the livestock, and a pig was won by the member whose name was drawn out of the hat. The draw was made at the end of the year. The Derby and Joan Club, the Over 60s Club, the WRVS Club and other societies cater for a wide range of interests.
Guides were introduced into Norton Keynes by Mrs. Nance Brew during the 1920s until the 1930s. During the Second World War, Miss Wardle of Chapel Street was the guider. Later in the early 1940s, they transferred to Miss Wardle's house at number 10 Chapel Street. After Miss Wardle left in the late 1940s, the guides were disbanded until the 11th of February 1965, when Sister Audrey Day of the Church Army re-registered the company. Miss Day left in the late 1960s. When Browndies was started in 1965, there was so much interest that 3 packs were needed. A rainbow pack began at a later date. From 1967 until 1997, Mrs. Brenda Rose was the guider, with other guiders, one being Mrs. Kath Swaffield, a guider for 25 years. By the 1980s, First and second Norton Keynes guides and Brownie companies contained 150 girls and many guiders, too numerous to name. Sadly, as television and other interests became popular, numbers gradually decreased, and due to a lack of leaders, the companies were eventually disbanded. Only one Brownie pack is now in the village.
In 1907, Mr. Haldane, Secretary for War, set in motion his new army plan, which established the territorial force. Staffordshire was charged with establishing, amongst other units, 2 brigades of engineers. One of the first tasks of the county association was to obtain suitable drill halls and HQ accommodation. Early in 1908, Captain W.B. Harrison offered Norton Hall for the unit of engineers. The Harrisons had moved some time previously to Aldershaw Hall near Lichfield and left a caretaker in their old ancestral home. Captain Harrison had been a founder of the Staffordshire Volunteer Corps, whose remaining units were now to be integrated in the new territorial force. He had for many years commanded the Brownhills Company. As he was now 70 years old, he left the training of the new units to his son, Captain W.E. Harrison. Recruitment commenced early in 1908 and is reported to have begun at the Cathedral Pit on Brownhills Common. Men seeking employment at Harrison's coal mines could be sure of a job if they joined the territorials. Office staff and colliers at the Grove Colliery, Little Worley, were also among the first recruits. The unit, officially the 2nd North Midland Field Company Royal Engineers, TF, enjoyed the next few years. Besides the army training, which included gun limbers drawn by horses, practising on a field in Chapel Street, now occupied by Jerome Primary School, and the annual camp, usually at Tewin in North Wales, the unit had an active social life with dances and entertainments at Norton Hall. In August 1914, whilst territorial forces throughout the country were at the annual camp, war with Germany was declared and units were rapidly returned to their home bases. The Norton lads arrived at the Brownhill station and marched along the Watling Street, entering the village with the band playing via Norton Hall Lane at 5 a.m. on Tuesday the 4th of August. By 6 a.m. the Railway Tavern was serving beer to a crowd of tired and thirsty but excited men. At parade later that morning, all men were given a sum of money with which to buy supplies of socks, shirts and underclothes, which at that time were not provided by the army. Their first task was to replace their horses, which had been rerouted to the south of England for use by the regular army, and an order to commandeer replacements from local firms was issued. Sergeant Bolton and 37 men marched into Cannock Square to collect the horses, which were tethered along the churchyard walls. They even took horses from Brownhill's Fire Brigade. Back at Norton, horses and men were distributed around the village, with the malt shovel, fleur-de-lis, the Hollybush Inn and the Turf Inn providing stabling. On Sunday the 10th of August, Harrison's engineers paraded in full strength at St James's Church at 3 p.m. prior to their departure on active service, and on Tuesday the 12th marched off to war. However, part of the territorial's conditions of service was that they had to complete 6 months of home service training before being deployed overseas. They marched along the Watling Street and Ricknell Street to Witchner Hall, the home of Captain W.E. Harrison, where they stayed overnight. Next day the unit made its way to Salt Brewery in Burton-upon-Trent, where the malting floors were turned into huge dormitories accommodating territorials from all over Staffordshire. There they remained while the War Office decided what to do with them. On the 16th of August they marched to Burton's railway station to travel to Luton Hoo, the palatial home of Sir Herbert Werner, where they commenced their training. They later moved to Englefield Green near Windsor, where in December they practised bridging the Thames in the grounds of Baron Schroeder. Christmas and the New Year was spent near Braintree, and in January they moved to Southampton Rest Camp. The story of Norton Territorial's part in the Great War is recorded in the official histories. One old soldier recalled marching through Ypres Market Square after the first gas attack. Those men who lost their lives in the Great War have their names recorded in the War Memorial East window in St James's Church. Mystery surrounds the whereabouts of the various sporting trophies won by them over the years, not least a silver medal won at the Royal Tournament. After the war, the Territorials returned to Norton Hall, leaving in 1932 for their new headquarters in Bridgetown, where they are still located.
The first meeting of Norton British Legion was held at the Red Lion Inn, Little Norton, on the 11th of March 1925, and it was held there until 1933. Later, meetings were held at various times at the following venues: the Malt Shovel, social clubs, Little Worley Hall and the Yew Tree Inn until 1949. In 1947, 2 huts were purchased from Ixon RAF station. These were erected on land in Birdwood Road, which was purchased some years before from Sir George Holcroft. The British Legion was built at a cost of £500. The new British Legion Club was opened on the 3rd of September 1949 by Colonel Chris Hatton and attended by many officials and members, numbering 300 ex-servicemen and 140 associate members. Norton Keynes Women's Section was formed in 1950, and during the following years money was raised and they purchased a plaque depicting the names of the 1914-18, 1945 men and boys from this village who lost their lives in these conflicts. This bronze plaque was unveiled on the 31st of October 1954 by Colonel A.J. Adams R.E., former second in command of the 213th Royal Engineers, when they had their headquarters at Norton Hall, which is in the village. Later, this plaque was rededicated in the Trinity Methodist Church in Poplar Street, due to the closing of the British Legion Club in the late 1960s. The British Legion was now renamed the Royal British Legion. The new Norton Keynes Royal British Legion Men's Section held their first meeting at the Sycamore Club in Edgewood Road, Norton Keynes, on the 29th of September 1989 with 24 members. The members still meet at the Sycamore Club and new members are always welcome. The Norton Keynes Women's Section reformed in 1990 and are still active today.
In May 1940, Mr. Anthony Eden called for men to join the LVD force, and many men flocked to join. Chase Down Police Division was the joining centre for Chase Terrace, Boney Hay, Norton Keynes and the Wilkin area off the Watling Street. The first meeting was held at the Cooperative Hall, Sankey's Corner, where D Company was formed. This was later divided into platoons.
Norton Keynes platoon met at a later date, and it was decided at this meeting that the men who had served in the 1914-1918 war were best fitted to be officers. All members were issued with a yellow card. These were later replaced by khaki armbands, emblazoned with LDV in black letters. The men jokingly called themselves the Look, Duck and Vanish Brigade. The second meeting was held in the old church schools in Church Road under the command of Lieutenant W.H. Rose. Meetings continued here until the buildings were declared unsafe in 1942. On 23rd of July 1940, the name was changed to Home Guard. During the early years, training was intense with grenade throwing and rifle training on E-Range at Hensford. The instructors of the company on these exercises were Company Bombing Officer Lieutenant W.H. Rose and Sergeant E.T. Sutton. The first air raid warning in this area was 11:40 p.m. on the 25th of June 1940. The all clear was given at 12:25 a.m. The first enemy bombs fell in and around Norton Pool, now Chasewater, on the 25th of August 1940, but no damage was caused.
Welcome to the Norton Keynes Community Partnership Office. The DVD that you've just seen was produced by the Partnership Heritage Subgroup. Norton Keynes Community Partnership is a dedicated group that will continue to serve the local residents and strive to make our village a better place to live. We will continue to work for and within the village as we run our minibus and continue to stage events such as the 1940s Day that we held recently. You can always find us in the office in the community centre, which is situated in the heart of the village. It is my privilege to thank everyone concerned with the production of this DVD, especially to the Local Heritage Initiative who supplied the funding for us, and for Captured Image who on our behalf have filmed it for us. Thank you.